Hey everyone, it's Will, and welcome to the channel. And as the kids say, Nighthawk Tua and pickle on that thing.
Hawk to it!
Well, now that we've all lost about 20 IQ points, we can get into the actual video. And I hope you guys did enjoy the little mini cinematic at the beginning. I think I'll continue to do those, and they should get way better over time. But I was able to hop onto the dev server earlier and mess around with the F-117 Nighthawk, which will be the first stealth aircraft in War Thunder, and yes, the stealth really does work. I'll get into the specifics of my testing later in this video, but it's pretty cool to see. Now, for those of you worried this means the F-22 or anything else of that nature is coming anytime soon, don't be. While, yes, they are working on the F-22, at least from what the leaks said, I still think it will be around 2 years before it gets here, probably at the end of 2026. The Nighthawk is just being used as a testbed for stealth, and Gaijin actually did something good for once and made it a squadron vehicle instead of an event vehicle. But on to the rest of the video. Starting off, yes, you heard it right, the F-117 will be 8.7 in air RB and will be 10.0 in ground RB, at least for now. And honestly, I think those battle ratings are fine and about where they should be. It doesn't have any air-to-air weaponry, no guns, and no missiles. It doesn't have any countermeasures or even an RWR or a radar. So for air RB, it has no way of getting air-to-air kills unless you bomb the enemy on the airfield, which I imagine plenty of people will try to do, but its best place will probably be in sim and ground RB. And then on to ground. Well, it does have some decent weapons like the GBU-31 JDAM, and the GBU-10 Paveway 2, it can only take 2 bombs at the most. It also only has a max speed of about 1,050 kilometers per hour at sea level, and its acceleration isn't particularly great, so it definitely won't be outrunning anything much, even at 8.7. Overall, it's just not a great plane for air battles. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely interesting and really funny when you just don't appear on enemy planes' radars, but the fact that you have no way to get air-to-air kills means it's pretty crappy. Plus, even with a max bomb load, you can't even take out a full base, or you could get at most 2 ground kills. I mean, obviously, your best bet for grinding the modifications would be to take it into air battles, whether realistic or sim battles, though you'll probably die less in sim since there's no spotting, so you either have to use your eyes or rely on your radar if you have one, which is where we get to aircraft radars as well as missiles that it could face. So, I tested against various radars, starting off with the F-3H Demon that will be the main threat to the Nighthawk in terms of planes with radars that it will face. I found the Demon was able to lock the F-117 at about 3 kilometers in front and side aspect, which is absurdly low, though it does help that its radar is already pretty bad. But seeing as though it carries the AIM-7C, which doesn't even start pulling until the motor stops burning, and it only pulls 15 Gs anyway, which means that you don't even need to do anything to evade it. And this is if they manage to lock you and fire the missile as soon as possible. So the Sparrows on the Demon really aren't an issue in front or even side aspect. And as for rear aspect, it was a bit longer at about 9.5 kilometers, but the Nighthawk is still maneuverable enough to easily evade it. As for the AIM-9B, which is the main IR missile you'll face at 8.7, it can lock you at about 4.5 kilometers in rear aspect, of course. But again, you can also just pull harder than the 9B can, so you shouldn't have to worry about dying to many missiles in air battles. But I also decided to test it against a few higher battle rating planes and their radars to see how its stealth held up. First off, we tested with the F-14B, which was able to lock with the Pulse Doppler Velocity, or PDV, at about 20 kilometers, though the lock was a bit iffy, but it's enough to get a Phoenix off. But you can also avoid it by either outmaneuvering it, or putting it in the notch and just moving away. We also tested the F-16C, where if you use the PDV mode, you can get a rough lock at 23 kilometers with a more solid lock at about 17 kilometers. Again, you can also fire an AMRAAM here, but the Nighthawk can notch it as well, though it is a bit hard to do so, but also very possible. The Su-27SM can detect it and lock it at 30 kilometers away using its head-on mode, and when in the normal PD search mode, it's only about 14.5 kilometers. While that might not sound as good as you thought, it's still pretty crazy that these radars that can normally detect targets up to 100 kilometers out, which is the max range that radars actually work at in War Thunder, versus only being able to detect the F-117 between 14 to 30 kilometers depending on the radar and mode. But what's even crazier is that the bombs have an even bigger RCS than the plane itself, since while testing, my friend locked onto the bombs when I opened my bomb bay to drop them before he could actually lock onto me, which is just insane to think about. We also tested a few other missiles, which I think I'll rattle off real quick. The AIM-9L can lock the Nighthawk at just under 3 kilometers in front aspect, The R-73 was also able to lock at just a bit under 4 kilometers, and the R-27ET could get a frontal aspect lock at about 8 kilometers. These missiles really have no issue locking onto the F-117 in rear aspect, though their lock range might be a little bit reduced compared to normal. While it's no F-22, you still have to think about how the F-117's RCS is 10 times bigger than the Raptor's is, which is only 100 square millimeters, versus the 1,000 square millimeters on the Nighthawk. Plus, the F-22 also has a reduced IR signature as well. That's about all I have for air testing, but it's already a lot to think about. The ground testing starts off with a few vehicles that will mainly face sitting at 10.0 for ground battles. The first was the Strela, which really doesn't struggle when using contrast lock, of course, at least in a clear sky where it can lock at a healthy 9 kilometers. But say it's cloudy in the match, which it usually seems to be for some reason, and it will have to rely on locking with infrared. When it comes to this, it reduced the lock range to half at only 4.5 kilometers. Also, against the Tunguska, it really couldn't see the F-117 at all till about 5 or 6 kilometers away. And finally, I wanted to test it against the Pantsir for shits and giggles. So the Pantsir was surprisingly limited as long as you kept yourself pointed towards the Pantsir. Flying away from it, the Pantsir could easily see and lock onto you, but also if you notch at 90 degrees, they can't see you either. But in terms of front aspect, it can detect with IRST at about 18 kilometers, and can detect and lock onto you with its radar at about 16 kilometers. Which, as I'm sure you all know, the Pantsir's radar is already absolutely insane, which just shows how well the stealth actually works. Also, it's great they properly modeled the RCS right, so that it can be detected much easier at rear aspects. Now that we're getting towards the end here, I wanted to give my thoughts overall. Well, the Nighthawk is interesting and cool to see, and can be very funny just being invisible to the enemy. It just isn't very good. Its main use will be in ground RB, where it's still not that great, only being able to take 2 bombs at most. And for that, I would suggest the GBU-10s, so you can actually guide them in. It has pretty decent zoom, which is nice for its built-in camera pod, and has okay thermals. As of right now, the pod doesn't auto-track properly, but that seems to just be a bug that will probably be fixed soon. Also, as long as you stay pretty high, you shouldn't have any issue avoiding the enemy SPAA, which should be easy to do since its climb rate is actually fairly good. So just take 2 GBU-10s and stay like 5 to 6 kilometers up, and turn off to the side a bit when you drop your bombs just to stay safe. Your main threat in ground RB will be enemy fighters, but at that point you just need to run and hope you have cover. Again, while it's not great, the Nighthawk does get me excited for the future of more advanced stealth planes, even though again, we're probably quite a ways away from them. But there is also some more ordnance it could receive to increase its capability just a little bit, like the GBU-27 Paveway 3, which is just a modified GBU-24 to fit in the F-117's bomb bay. That would be a pretty nice upgrade over the Paveway 2s that it has on the dev server right now. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think about the F-117 Nighthawk, and if you're going to pick it up when it comes to the game as well. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next one.